Well, Eric, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Bill Floten. I'm from Seattle, and I'm a water flyer. I got interested in flying very early on, specifically amphibs, and continued that interest for a long time. Years back, I got interested in rare amphibians, the Grumman Duck being one of them. I can't tell you exactly why. But I did. Woke up one morning and said, that's what I need. So I began to search around for one, only to find out that there weren't very many, and the ones that were available were in museums or privately held. So I set about to find one, put one together, do whatever it took. And the first part that I bought for the Grumman Duck was a tail wheel for $40. And I figured, I'm on my way now. It's all downhill. And I would go to air shows and ask anybody that would talk to me, gee, do you have any Grumman Duck parts? Do you know where anything is? And so on and so forth. And I found a few items like that, a few ailerons and other pieces. But I ended up in Miami talking to Mr. Amphib, Dean Franklin, who was a long-term amphibian dealer. Dean was kind enough to let me go through all of his parts and look for any duck parts he had, and I ended up with some gearboxes and so on from him. But he said, gee, if you really want a duck, why, there's one sunk in a lake in the Bahamas. Of course, the next day I was over there doing a survey and see if I could find it. And I was trying to be a little bit clever about it. Turns out I was probably the only guy on the whole island that didn't know where it was, but nobody knew what it was. So to make a long story short, I gathered up my dive gear and lift bags and all that sort of thing, and met a friend of mine, Kevin Huey, in New Providence, which is the main city there is Nassau. And we set about to recover this thing. It was laying on the bottom of the lake upside down. It had crashed on takeoff, and we disassembled it underwater and then attached lift bags to various sections of it to lift it to the surface. And I got a road crane, hydro crane, to come down, lift it out of the lake, and I built a gigantic pallet and put it on a freighter into Miami. They deck loaded it on a freighter. And talk about optimism, I'd had my guy take my truck and a flatbed trailer from Seattle all the way to Miami under the idea that, well, of course I would get it. I think the fact that Kevin and I were able to pull that off in a space of a week and a half was just plain luck, really. I mean, it happens that way on TV, but in real life it very rarely happens. So I got back into Miami, hauled it home to Seattle, and here I've got this Grumman Duck project. And at that time, I'd been searching for all the parts. I didn't know what model this Grumman Duck was. Of the Grumman Duck series, there were 600 built, 300 by Grumman, 300 by Columbia Aircraft. All the Grumman series are an experimental through a J2F-5, and Columbia Aircraft built all the rest, 300 of a -6. Now this is the only early Grumman-built duck that's, let's say, in captivity. I'm not sure there'll ever be another one, but they're looking. There's one sunk in the ice in Greenland they're trying to get, but it remains to be seen whether that'll happen. At that time, I started collecting all the parts for this aircraft. Now this is a J2F-4. It's number 1649. It was one of 32 -4s ever built, and the engine is especially unique. It's 800 horse, 40 spline direct drive, Wright radial, 9-cylinder radial, and is specific to the Duck. There were two Duck models that used it, the -3 and the -4. They built 32 -4s, 30 -3s, so that's roughly 60-something aircraft. the estimate of the total number of engines built was something in the neighborhood of 120. So I began to look for an engine that was 75, 80 years old, one of 125 that were ever built. And at that time, I was a little bit despondent. I thought, well, I don't know, they'll pull this off. About that time, I was down at the Museum of Flight in Seattle looking at their engine display, and I thought, well, this engine looks familiar. Walked over there, sure enough, an 1820-30. I talked to the curator and said, gee, I'd like to have the engine, what would you trade? And he said, well, we'll trade it for a B-17 display engine. The 50 spline, they're 1,200 horse, and there's a lot of them. They build them for the B-17 during the war, and they're all over the place. So I got my engine shop to build up a display engine and traded the museum for the engine that's on this Duck right now. All of the other parts were just a hunt. For instance, all of the original instruments. I didn't want to substitute anything that wasn't original. So I began to search for all the original instruments, talked to every instrument guy I could, and eventually I got them all. All of the instrumentation in this Duck are original, and the engine is original, and the airframe is built up original. There's no, I think the only departure from that are disc brakes on this airplane, which of course it needed. The history of this particular airplane is very interesting. This was boxed up at Grumman in late 1940 and shipped to Hawaii. At that time it was a territory of Hawaii. It shipped to Pearl Harbor, they assembled it there. They then assigned it to Utility Squadron 1, and it was on Ford Island when the Japanese attacked. So I'm sure the Japanese had bigger targets than a Duck, so the Duck survived that, but it was there at the time. After that engagement, what I find interesting is it was shipped to New Caledonia and assigned to Carrier Aircraft Service Unit 3, which was stationed on Vella Lavala. Vella Lavala is one of the islands in the Central Solomon Group. So you got Guadalcanal on one end, and although running up the chain to Rabaul, the Guadalcanal engagement was finished in '42, and they began to move up the island. The interesting thing to me was that Casu 3 was assigned to Vella Lavala. On that same island, there were 6 Marine squadrons of Corsairs, 2 of Navy F-6F. One of the Marine squadrons was VMF 214, Boeington's group. And this particular aircraft was assigned to Casu 3 and the 1st Marine Air Wing. So, and it's not a stretch to say, wow, what did these Marine groups use this for? I mean, was this the utility hack on the island? And I just find it very interesting. After they took the Solomon Islands, it was shipped back to Alameda or San Francisco. From San Francisco, it proceeded north. It was in Seattle for a while, North Bend for a while, did coastal patrols, and then was shipped to Chino, California, and stricken in 1947, where it was purchased by a guy named Jack Hardwick, and a lot of warbird guys are familiar with that name because he bought so many warbirds, this being one of them. It ended up hauling fish in the Bahamas, and what happened is the fellow that was flying it landed on a lake, tied off the anchor on the front cleat, came out the next day and hopped in his airplane and said, well, gee, what am I going to do? If I pull the anchor, the whole aircraft will end up on the shore. So I'll just take off with the anchor dragging, and it'll suck up alongside the hull, and I'll go over and land on land. It'll bounce around a little bit, but should be okay. No, it pulled the nose underwater, it flipped the whole thing on its back, and sunk it right there. In there, that was about as near as we can tell, 1953, 54, somewhere in there, and that's where I found it. The restoration process, I mean, talk to any of these guys that do it, you're talking about years long. I started it and worked on it for 5 years. At that time, I built up all the main wing spars and commissioned the canopy to be redone, and did a lot of wing work, rebuilt the tail feathers and so on. And then it occurred to me that I wasn't going to have the staying power to do it. And so I sold it. I wanted to see it fly. And so I sold it. And the next guy down the line had a little more staying power, and Wichita Air Service was the group that finished it off and did a very, very fine job.
So you had 5 years into it. How long did it take them to finish it up?
They bought it in 97, 8 years. Took them 8 years more to finish it up. It's a long time.
13-year restoration.
Yeah,
it shows, though. It's
well,
beautiful.
it's the thing I like about it is Terry Reynolds was heading up Wichita Air Service at that time, and Derek Johnson was his right-hand guy, and both of those guys had the same vision that it should be right. I mean, no shortcuts. And anybody in this business will tell you, when you take that attitude, you probably just added 50% to the cost of the project. And so they worked on it. It first flew in 2005. It won Grand Champion Warbird at Oshkosh in 2006. And has been flying ever since. Chuck Greenhill owned it for a long time. Now Scott Glover owns it. It's really a piece of history. There aren't any other Grumman-built ducks out there. If you look over at the airplane closely, you can, it's just detail and quality everywhere. So I'm real proud of it. I was proud to be a part of it. Small part, but I got the ball rolling, and others finished it. So.
And you got to fly over here. Had you flown? Had you flown in it before?
I did. I flew in it one time. When it first flew in 2005, Dennis Sanders was test pilot. Shook it out, and there were a couple of bugs, but nothing serious. And then Chuck Greenhill was the second ride, and they were kind enough to give me the third ride, so I got to ride in it at that time. But the longest flight that I've ever had in it has been to Mount Pleasant, or from Mount Pleasant to Breckenridge, and it was a real thrill. Yeah.
Nice.
I'm a polished guy. I'm ready for submarine coastal patrol now.